The diary lay open on the battered wooden table, its pages yellowed and fragile, dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light filtering through the library's grimy windows. Tom Harper sat beside Margaret Lane, their faces close together, eyes scanning the cramped, flowing script that chronicled decades of sorrow and strange happenings in their town. The room smelled faintly of old paper and must, mingled with the sharp tang of Tom's stale coffee. Margaret's finger traced the faded words, her voice low and steady as she read aloud. And again, the voices returned on the wind, a lament carried by the static that filled the nights. Families torn asunder, grief piling upon grief, the shadow growing with each farewell. Tom's gaze flicked to the radio perched on the shelf nearby. It was silent now, but earlier, the faintest of voices had seeped through fragments of warnings, echoes of Claire's voice, distorted yet unmistakable. His heart clenched painfully. "It's like history repeating itself," Margaret murmured, eyes darkening. The entries mentioned disappearances, sudden deaths, and a presence felt but unseen. Every time the grief in the town swells, so too does this entity. Tom swallowed hard, memories swirling like a storm in his mind. Claire's pale face, the hospital's sterile white walls, the helplessness clawing at his chest as her breath grew shallow. He'd told himself it was over, done. But now, the diaries suggested otherwise. This was no random haunting. It was a curse, fed by the sorrow that gripped them all. He closed his eyes briefly, the room falling away as Claire's voice whispered through the static in his mind. "Tom, beware. It feeds on what you cannot let go." Margaret's voice brought him back. "There's more here," she said, flipping the page. "Listen to this. The hollow grows stronger with every tear shed, every silent prayer unanswered. To break the cycle, one must face the shadow and stop the mourning from consuming the living." Tom's fingers clenched into fists. The weight of it pressed down on him, heavier than any grief. He had to act, but the fear of losing himself to the same darkness was overwhelming. That evening, alone in his dim living room, Tom sat with the radio crackling softly beside him. The voices came through again, layered, fragmented, a chorus of mourning that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. Among them, Claire's voice surfaced, tender and fractured, pulling him back to their last days together. "Remember the light," she urged, her tone urgent yet distant. His mind flooded with images of her frailty, the slow ebbing of life that no doctor could halt. The guilt of survival burned fiercely. Was his obsession with the voices a bridge or a trap? Days passed in a haze of research and restless nights. Margaret and Tom continued their work, uncovering entries that traced the entity's influence back through generations. Each tragedy echoed the last lost breeding loss, the hollow presence growing stronger with each broken heart. One late afternoon, Margaret read aloud a particularly harrowing passage. On the night the last light died, the town fell silent but for the radio's mournful song, a dirge for souls lost and those yet to come. Her voice trembled, eyes flicking nervously to the window as shadows stretched longer. Tom felt a chill settle deep in his bones. The diary was more than history. It was a warning, a map of sorrow he had to navigate. That night, standing by his window, Tom looked out over the town cloaked in darkness. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint crackle of the radio. The voices whispered like ghosts in the wind, a painful reminder of what had been lost and what was at stake. He steeled himself, the ache in his chest mingling with a fragile hope. The cycle could be broken. He had to believe it. For Claire, for the town, for himself. But as the static swelled once more, carrying voices both familiar and unknown, Tom knew the path ahead would test the limits of his courage and sanity. The hollow presence was not yet done. His journey into the heart of grief and darkness was only just beginning. "Claire," Tom whispered into the silence, "I'm coming for you." The radio hummed in response, a faint crackle riding the edge of the night, and in that fragile moment, the line between the living and the dead blurred once again. The frequencies hummed louder than ever now, a chaotic storm of static and fragmented voices that seemed to claw at the edges of sanity. In the dim corners of his living room, Tom Harper sat surrounded by his arsenal of radios, each one a portal to the spectral voices that haunted the town. His fingers trembled as he adjusted the dials, desperate to isolate the faintest whisper of Claire's voice among the growing cacophony. The air was thick with a suffocating tension, as if the very atmosphere had been charged with unseen electricity. Outside, the town was unraveling. Reports flooded in, neighbors hearing faint cries and warnings through their radios. Strangers crossing the streets with haunted eyes, whispers spreading like wildfire in the cold night air. The collective paranoia was palpable. At the heart of it all, Tom felt the crushing weight of his obsession pressing down on him, threatening to consume the fragile threads that still connected him to the living. Eli Jacobs, once a dismissive voice on the local airwaves, had undergone a profound transformation. The skeptical glint in his eyes had been replaced by a resolute intensity. At the radio station, Eli meticulously flipped switches and scrutinized equipment, his every movement betraying a man preparing for battle against an enemy unseen but deeply felt. His voice, once light and mocking, now carried a steady reassurance as he worked alongside Tom to decipher the maddening transmissions. "It's like the static itself is alive," Eli remarked one evening, eyes fixed on the oscillating waves on the screen. "It's feeding off the fear, the grief. We need to be ready." Margaret Lane, the ever-steady librarian, had become a vital anchor in the storm. In the quiet sanctuary of the library, she sifted through brittle documents and faded photographs, her brow furrowed with concern. Tom recounted the recent surge in voices, the spreading dread that gripped their neighbors, and the mounting evidence of something ancient stirring beneath the town's surface. "This isn't just random interference," Margaret said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a pattern, a cycle of grief and loss that seems to feed whatever this is." Sarah Collins, Tom's neighbor, had sought him out in the dead of night, her eyes wide with fear. Her voice trembled as she described the voices that haunted her dreams, the chilling warnings that seeped from her radio like a poison. "It's like they're trying to tell us something," she said, clutching her coat tightly. "But what?" The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and carrying an eerie chorus of static that seemed to echo from every corner of the town. The radios crackled violently, bursting with a sudden surge of energy that sent a ripple through the room. Tom's heart pounded in his chest. The hollow presence was growing stronger, its grip tightening like a noose. The boundary between the living and the dead was thinning, and the town teetered on the edge of an abyss. Yet amid the fear and chaos, a fragile hope flickered. Eli's unwavering resolve, Margaret's knowledge, Sarah's shared fear, and Tom's burning determination coalesced into a fragile alliance. They were no longer isolated victims of the haunting. They were a resistance, preparing to face the darkness head-on. But the question remained, could they confront the hollow presence before it consumed everything they held dear? As the night deepened and the static roared like a tempest, Tom adjusted the radio one final time. Through the dissonant waves, a familiar, fractured voice whispered his name, Claire's voice, clear and urgent, a beacon in the encroaching night. And with it came the chilling promise of confrontation, where past and present, life and death, would collide in a storm of fear and desperate hope. The battle was coming, and Tom Harper would have to face it alone or not at all. The night had fallen heavy and dark, the sky roiling with thick, angry clouds that blotted out the stars. I stood by the window, my breath fogging the glass as torrents of rain hammered the streets below. Thunder rolled like the growl of some ancient beast, shaking the very bones of the town. Inside my small living room, the radio sputtered and hissed, the static swelling with the storm's fury. Then, through the crackling interference, a voice broke, through a voice I thought I'd never hear again. Claire, her words were fragmented, broken by bursts of static, but unmistakable. Tom, the boundary, it's breaking. Darkness comes. The urgency in her tone was a stark contrast to the gentle warmth I remembered. Every syllable struck me like a cold blade, cutting through the fog of grief that had long enveloped me. I gripped the windowsill, knuckles white, as the radio's volume seemed to swell in tandem with the storm outside. It was as if the tempest was a conductor, orchestrating the spectral symphony that now filled the airwaves. The many voices layered atop one another in a chaotic chorus of warnings and sorrow, rippling through the static like waves lashing against a crumbling shore. I wasn't alone in this ordeal. Earlier that evening, I had met with Margaret Lane in her cluttered study, the faint glow of a single lamp casting long shadows over piles of dusty books and yellowed papers. Between us lay the old diary, its fragile pages filled with hurried, trembling script that told stories of past tragedies eerily similar to our own. Each entry was a thread weaving into the tapestry of the town's dark history disappearances. Madness, grief feeding an unseen force. Margaret's calm demeanor belied the storm brewing in her eyes. "This isn't just coincidence," she said softly, tracing a finger along a passage. "The broadcasts, the disappearances, they're part of a cycle, Tom. And whatever it is feeding off our sorrow, it's growing stronger." Her words settled heavily in the room, mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility press down on me like the oppressive humidity outside. Later, at Eli's makeshift radio station, the atmosphere was tense, filled with the low hum of equipment and the occasional burst of static. Eli, once a skeptic, now wore the wary expression of a man who had glimpsed something beyond understanding. His hands trembled as he adjusted the dials, trying to stabilize the signal. The voices that poured through were no longer mere interference. They were urgent, pleading, fragmented cries from the other side. "This isn't just noise anymore," Eli muttered, eyes fixed on the oscillating waveforms. "It's a warning." Returning home, I sat alone, the storm's howl a constant backdrop to the voices swirling in my mind. The radio's buzz was relentless, but amidst the chaos, Claire's voice emerged again clearer, more insistent. "Prepare, Tom. The night will tear the veil apart. You must stand between worlds." Her words ignited a fragile spark of hope within me, mingled with the dread that threatened to consume what little sanity I had left. I knew the night ahead would be the crucible where past and present collided, where grief and fear would either shatter me or forge a weapon strong enough to hold back the encroaching darkness. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the storm's fury and the unseen force that prowled just beyond the veil. Tonight, I would face the hollow presence, no longer as a broken man haunted by memories, but as a guardian standing at the fragile boundary between life and death. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof. Inside, The radios blared their spectral warnings, a gathering storm of static and voices that blurred the line between worlds. And as the night deepened, so too did the shadows around me, whispering promises of terror and the hope that I might yet hold back the coming darkness. I reached for the radio once more, tuning the dials with trembling hands. "Claire," I whispered into the storm, "I'm listening." The voice that answered was faint, but resolute, a beacon in the swirling tempest. "Hold fast, Tom. The night is coming." And with that, the gathering storm surged onward, carrying with it the fate of the town and of my own fragile soul. The storm outside had been gathering for hours, but now it unleashed its fury, thunder booming across the town like an angry god's wrath. I sat alone in the dim glow of my living room, the only light flickering from the old table lamp, its shade casting long, uneasy shadows on the walls. The radio, perched precariously on the edge of the battered wooden table, hissed and crackled with static, the eerie white noise filling the room like a living thing. Among the chaos of the static, a voice emerged, soft, fractured, unmistakably Claire's. "Tom, it's coming. You have to listen." Her words were faint, fragmented by interference, but the unmistakable warmth of her tone pierced through the distortion. My heart pounded violently, a mixture of dread and desperate hope flooding my chest. I reached out, hands trembling, fingers brushing the radio's knobs as I tried to stabilize the signal. Each adjustment brought her voice into sharper focus, then warped it again, as if the entity itself fought to keep her words lost in the noise. I leaned closer, whispering back to the static, "Claire, I'm here. I'm listening." Suddenly, the room's temperature dropped sharply. The air thickened, heavy with a suffocating presence that pressed against my skin like a wet shroud. The lights flickered violently, then all at once plunged into darkness. Only the radio's glow remained, casting an eerie blue light across my face. A deep silence followed, the kind that robs you of breath and sanity. Then, without warning, the static burst into a cacophony of shrieks and whispers, twisting and swirling around me. From that maelstrom, the hollow presence made itself known, not in a shape, but in a weight, a distortion of sound and space, an oppressive force that bent reality itself. I staggered back, clutching my chest, the memories flooding me unbidden. Claire's smile, her laughter echoing in sunlit rooms, the softness of her touch, all these moments swirled with the terrifying now, blurring the lines between past and present. Her voice cut through the chaos again, steady and urgent. "Don't let it take you. Hold on to me, Tom." Desperation clawed at me. I forced myself to focus on her words, the fragile lifeline tethering me to sanity. The radio's volume crept higher, drowning out the entity's malevolent whispers, the static's biting cold. I could feel the presence pushing back, trying to fracture my resolve, to pull me into its endless void of grief and despair. Lightning illuminated the room in jagged bursts, revealing glimpses of the shadows that writhed along the walls, wisting amorphous, never quite solid. I clenched my fists, fighting through the fear that threatened to consume me. "I won't let you win," I hissed into the storm. The battle waged on, a harrowing dance of light and darkness, memory and nightmare. My mind teetered on the edge, haunted by the possibility that I was losing not just the fight against the hollow presence, but my very grasp on reality. But Claire's voice, warm and steady, never faltered. It was a beacon cutting through the storm's fury, the static's malevolence. Minutes stretched like hours as I stood my ground, the radio a lifeline, the storm a raging battlefield. Then, slowly, the oppressive weight began to lift. The static softened, the shadows receded, and the room's temperature crept back to normal. The radio fell silent, the storm outside dwindling to a gentle rain. I sank to my knees, breath ragged, body trembling. The ordeal had left scars deeper than the eye could see, wounds etched in mind and soul. But for now, the hollow presence was pushed back, if only momentarily. Claire's final whisper lingered in the silence, a promise and a warning: I'm with you, always. As the rain tapped softly against the window, I knew this was far from over. The veil between worlds had been crossed tonight, and though I had faced the darkness, it had marked me. The question gnawed at me how long before it returned, stronger and more relentless. And would I be ready? Yet, in the heart of that terrifying night, amidst the static and shadows, I found a sliver of hope. I was not alone. Claire's voice, fragile and enduring, was my anchor. And with it, I would fight to protect the living, to face the grief, and to cross the veil again if I had to. The battle for the town and my own soul was only beginning. The storm had reached its crescendo, a violent symphony of thunder and howling wind that rattled the very bones of the old radio station where I had staged my desperate stand. Every instinct screamed for me to flee, but I held my ground, clutching the makeshift talismans and equipment where'd cobbled together fragments of old technology and desperate hope. The static that had roared like a beast moments before suddenly cut to nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that presses on your eardrums so heavily it's almost physical. I slumped against the cracked concrete wall, sweat mixing with rain and blood trickling from a gash on my forehead. My breath came in ragged gasps, chest heaving as the adrenaline ebbed away. For the first time in months, the oppressive presence that had haunted Metha, formless shadow that twisted memories and clawed at my sanity, felt like it had receded. Yet the silence was unnatural, as if the world itself held its breath. Back home, the radios were dead. No static hiss, no distant voices, no faint echo of Claire's fractured warnings. I sat in the dim light of the living room, surrounded by the silent machines, their dials frozen like tombstones, marking the boundary of a world I'd barely survived crossing. My hands trembled as I reached out to each, coaxing them as if willing them to speak. But only a hollow nothingness responded. The absence of sound was deafening. The memories came unbidden, sharp and jagged. Claire's voice, fragile and urgent, floating through the static like a ghostly melody. The look in her eyes when she warned me, fear wrapped in love, a desperate plea to hold on. I closed my eyes and tried to hold on to that moment, but the silence seemed to swallow it whole. A soft knock at the door startled me. Margaret and Eli stood there, their faces drawn and weary but alive with cautious hope. Margaret's sharp eyes searched mine as she stepped inside, the weight of unspoken understanding hanging between us. Eli, once the skeptic, now an uneasy believer, carried the same haunted look that had settled over me. We spoke in low tones, recounting the battle with the hollow presence, piecing together the fragmented truths we'd uncovered. The town outside lay silent. The storm passed, but the air still thick with tension. It was as if the world itself waited for the next move, the next ripple in a pond still trembling from a stone's throw. Night deepened, and I found myself alone once more, staring out the window into the darkness beyond. The silence pressed in around me, and for a fleeting moment, the shadows seemed to pulse, alive with a presence I couldn't see but could feel. I shivered, the memory of Claire's voice whispering just beyond reach, a haunting refrain that promised this was not the end. Had I truly pushed the hollow presence back, or had I merely silenced its voice for a time? The question gnawed at the edges of my mind as exhaustion claimed me, dragging me into a restless sleep haunted by echoes of static and shadow. In the quiet aftermath, the town seemed to breathe again, tentative and fragile. But beneath the surface, the weight of grief and fear lingered. A reminder that the boundary between life and death remained thin and perilous. And as the radios sat silent, I knew that some voices never truly fade. They wait, patient and eternal, in the hollow spaces between worlds. The night stretched on, and in that fragile silence, I faced the truth I had long avoided. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of statica, reminder that the hollow presence was not gone, only waiting, and I would be ready.